Good afternoon. I must say I've been to a lot of tech events, or should I say startup-focused events, but never one that had this kind of mixed audience that is based on faith and social entrepreneuring, as it were. Plus, I've spoken with people doing tech. It's quite a diverse audience. I want to say, obviously, as this is one event, for those of you who are in this process, this should be one of many such events that you attend. I can look back over my days doing my startup in Austin, and every event that I could get to that had to do with mentoring, had to do with with connecting, I was there. And so I hope that you embrace this journey fully. So I just want to share with you a couple of things that I've learned over the years, 10 things, that I wish I had known when I did my startup. The first, and I'm in my second one. The first one, thank God, we had a successful exit. It was acquired by GameStop, one of the few minority-based companies that has been acquired by a Fortune 500 company. And I'm in my second company now, having learned the agony and the joy of success. I have embraced on another journey. So I want to share with you 10 things that I learned. I wish I had known, and hopefully that will provide some insights to you as you're on your journey in this process. So, first 5. I wish I understood my own emotional intelligence and that of my team better. Now, this may sound, what is emotional intelligence? I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, I'm very logical, right? You either make sense to me or you do not, right? And so, in the business of growing a company, that can be a disadvantage if you're just purely that logical. You need to understand the psychology of your team members better, how they cope with stress. How do you cope with stress? What are your social skills in mentoring your team and with connecting with each other? And the good thing is that these days there are standardized ways of you and your team doing an EQI test or something like that, and then having a coach talk to you so you can understand how do you react under pressure? How do you think about problem solving? What is your empathy level? What is your response to stress? These are things that, as a team, because when you start a startup, it's like getting married. And as I was sharing with someone earlier, the divorce cost is very high if you actually decide to go down that route. So you really want to do everything you can to understand each other as deeply as you can. So one of the good things is that there are standardized ways these days of doing this, not to judge each other, but to become more transparent with each other and how you can better support each other. I wish I had known a more efficient way to sharply and quickly define my vision and strategy. I tell you a little quick story. When I started my company, it was based on a very simple idea. I was watching my son play his video game, the GameCube back then. And I asked him this question, hey Matt, what if you could actually have your friend join you in this game remotely without them having to have a video game console and play with you? Would that excite you? And he was just all over it. It was so, he was so excited by the prospect that my friends could connect with me and play, even if they didn't have a game console. That was the idea behind what we call today cloud gaming. Today, if you go to Sony's website, Sony has a service called PlayStation Now. This is essentially a cloud gaming service. It's Netflix for video games, as it were. What I didn't realize then, that what I enjoyed more was watching Matthew play. I didn't necessarily like playing video games. I still don't. When I play, it gives me a headache, right? But I enjoy watching. And that subtle difference of playing versus spectating made a big difference. For example, I'll tell you the difference. Twitch.tv, which was based on the idea of just purely spectating video games, was acquired by Amazon for $1 billion recently. And I'm not complaining, my company was acquired as well, but the idea is that the prospect is that if I had more sharply figured out that is really the spectating aspect of it that appealed to me, maybe that could have been a difference. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek, and you'll see why, because as a scientist, I really like the idea of solving innovative problems, right? So, yes, I could make money by doing a lot of things, simple things, websites, whatever it is, but I'm also drawn to the idea of solving something that is challenging. And truth be told, spectating is not that very challenging, right? It's a good business, but it was not as attractive to me at that point. So anyway, I wish I knew to take more money when it was offered in the early stages of funding. One of the challenges you'll have as an investor, if you get to the point where you actually have a VC trying to offer you money, is that this tension of how much dilution you're going to take versus how much you're going to give up, as it were, to take more capital. There's this desire that you want to hold on to more of the company. And so you do your analysis and figure, well, I can make it on less. And I'd caution you, it always costs more than you think. And so when later on you realize you need more capital, your investors also know that, and you're negotiating from a disadvantage, right? So it will cost you more at that point. So I would say, yes, take it up front while they are eager and excited and they believe in you. Yes, there is some risk of dilution, but frankly, it may actually turn to be your advantage. I wish I knew a better way to overcome the negative bias that some VCs have towards women and minorities. This is a room that I can look around, pretty mixed audience, a fair number of minorities. This is a real thing. You need to understand the world in which you're playing. The most recent data that I saw, the vast majority of venture capital funding goes towards male Caucasian-based company. If you're a woman, just recently, if you watched Megyn Kelly on 60 Minutes, she was talking about with these women who are in Silicon Valley, and they talk about the kind of sexual harassment that they have to go through from VCs who expect more than funding from them. It's not fun. Right? This is happening now. 1%, the most recent data I saw is 1% of black based company gets venture funding. The odds are really, really strong against you. And so you need to go into this with your eyes wide open. There are things you can do, I would say, to mitigate for these risks. One, really broaden your friendship pool. If you're going to a VC, as much as possible, be a mixed team, right? Don't be an all-black team, all-minority team. Chances are it's going to work against you. And I say this, not that you're using people, but it means you should broaden your friendship circle. Because your friends are really the key people that you're going to start your company with initially. And so you really should think about that carefully. I wish I had known how to better balance my motivation to be a pioneer versus a quick way to make money, a shorter time to market. I say this again back to what I said earlier, that I like problems that are challenging. But problems that are challenging takes a substantial amount of research and innovation to come to play. Cloud gaming, in some ways, I have a place in history because I started something that nobody knew was possible. So I'm a pioneer in that sense. But it took a lot of time and effort, right? The research time from I started to the time that we actually raised capital was like 4 or 5 years of fundamental research that I had to do, right? The same thing with Jamkazan, my current company. It took us a long time to build this global platform that people use all over the world to do all kinds of things, to connect and play music live and in sync for church rehearsal, for music lessons, for all these kind of things. But it's innovating at a very fundamental level. So if you want to make a quick buck, and this is not a knock on anyone, because some people just love the idea of making money. I love the idea of pioneering and making money. And so trying to find that right balance is something that I wish I knew how to do better. I wish I had known how to build a better resource network before I needed it. When it comes to raising capital, you cannot wait until you need it to try and build your network at that point, right? You really need to be connecting with people long before you need it, right? Going to those meetups, connecting, chatting with people, with other entrepreneurs, being visible in some ways to that circle that people know your name, have some kind of recognition around who you are, etc. These days you can do a lot of that with LinkedIn by connecting and finding out who's connected to whom, but nothing beats face-to-face, right? Be there, join the tech startups, the mentoring group. If you're in Bay Area, if you can get into YC Combinator, whatever it is, any of those things, get in them and get your presence known and build your Rolodex, as it were. I wish I had known how to strike a better balance between work and family. That's a tough one for an entrepreneur. In the early stages of my company, I left IBM Research and started working as a contractor because at IBM Research, you can't file patents while you're working for them. So they claim anything you invent or patents you file is theirs, right? So I had to leave and start my own company, right? And work as a consultant contractor while working. So I'm working 80, 100 hours a week. I work in the days and come home and work till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Thank God for Sabbath, right? Because that was a cutoff point for me because, at least I could get a day of rest. But what I would do, with my wife and I, we'd have devotion, and I would say between 10 and 10:30, that's our time. We have a cup of tea, we sit down and we talk, and then I'm back at it, right? The process of being an entrepreneur is a very grinding process. It's not a process of convenience, but I wish I had a better, I known how to do it more balanced than I have. I wish I had known how to trust God through the dim and uncertain times. They will come. It is nothing like getting 200 no's from a venture, as you knock on VC's door and just no, 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 right? It wears on you, right? And even when you have raised the funding and you go through those dips in the process of getting product to market and you're running out of cash and all the anxiety that comes with that, right? It wears on you. And I must say, I've said this before, if you're not a praying person, you will become one when you start a business, right? It will put you in that place of dependence that you will pray like you've never prayed before. But I seriously wish I was better able to manage that dynamic better than I have. I could tell the stories of how God has worked amazingly through this whole process with my company and revealed himself many, many times, but that may be for another time. I wish I had known how to celebrate the little victories more joyfully. There's a text in Solomon, Songs of Solomon 2:15 that says, catch the little foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vineyard, right? The vineyards that are in bloom. You think of these as negative things, the little foxes that come in, but the little victories, if you don't recognize them and celebrate them, you miss opportunities to renew your team and rejuvenate the passion of what you're doing, right? You have to recognize those things. You have, as an entrepreneur, by definition, you have to be optimistic. You have to believe it is possible when nobody else believes it's possible. So you have to always be leaning on the possible, right? Seeing the possibility while, being realistic as much as you can, but recognizing that your posture, your bent is to lean towards this is possible and celebrate when you get those victories. A victory, for example, you close a deal. You get a customer, one customer, first customer, right? I remember the day when EA said they wanted to use our platform. They want to do an evaluation. It's like, finally, right? Right? You don't, that takes, particularly when it comes to enterprise customers, it's a very long sales cycle, all right? So getting to that point where someone said, yeah, I want to do this is a non-trivial milestone. And finally, I wish I'd known that it's not really easier the second or the next time round. If if you ever met a serial entrepreneur will have businesses that have failed, even though they had a successful one before, right? So you can never make the assumption because you had a success before that the next one is going to be easier. Every business, by definition, carries its own risk, and it's the whole dynamic of trying to generate demand, create awareness, acquire customers, right? All of those things are unique to that business. Now, having done it before, you are more aware. No question about it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the risk is less. And so part of what as an entrepreneur, you need to enjoy the intrinsic process of solving or growing the business. Because if you don't, right, the second time around or whenever it is, you'll be worn thin very quickly. So these are some 10 insights that I quickly just want to share with you as I reflect on my own experience, that as you are stepping into that process, or if you're in that process, I hope provides some inkling, some nudge as to how you may want to think about what you're doing and think about your next steps. Thank you.
I have mic 4. Okay, good. So I was chatting with Peter before his talk, and I found out something really fascinating. His first entrepreneurial venture was a church plant. And I asked him what skills translated right into business. Yeah. Could you unpack that for us?
Sure. I do believe that doing a church plant is probably the most difficult business you'll ever do, the most difficult entrepreneurial venture you'll undertake. And here's why. Nobody gets paid, right? And your only stick, as it were, is to convince people that this is worth doing, right? It's a very challenging process to get a group of people of disparate understanding, disparate level of commitment to stay with that process. But in the process, you learn some things. You learn how to build a team. You learn patience. You learn the whole organization and dependence on God. These are things you learn who you are at your core. How strong are you? How resolved are you to stick with this thing? Considering, frankly, that most church plants fail. All right? It's like in a business. 9 out of 10 businesses will fail. I don't know what the statistics are for most churches, but I do know within 3 to 4 years, most church plants are dead. All right? Thankfully, the church plant is a church and is still growing today. But you learn those things in that process, which translates very practically into growing your own business.
Beautiful. I want to open up to anyone that might have a question, because there was lots of practical tips that you had up there on the 10 points. I was wanting you to kind of speak to sharpening vision. What are some effective tools to do that? Because you said I wish I had.
Good point. Good question. So you have an idea, all right? The question is, how do you validate that idea? And not just validate it in a sense, well, how do you know that anybody else believes in this thing? What's your process? Who's your network? Who do you trust? Where do you find people who can give you rational and trustworthy feedback, right? That is what I believe is entailing sharpening your vision. So what I did, I had the idea for this company, and I was working at a startup before I went to IBM Research. The founder of that startup was Bob Fabio, which is one of the most well-known entrepreneur in Austin. His company was acquired by IBM for nearly $1 billion. So I invited Bob out to lunch. I said, hey, Bob, I have this idea. I'd like to bounce it off you and to hear what you think. And Bob, graciously accepted my invitation, and I had like 3 or 4 slides, and I shared it with him, and he gave me a very strong affirmation. He said, I think you're onto something. Here are a couple of things that I suggest you do. How about you do, the first thing you need to do is a market survey to see if anyone would subscribe to this service as the way you described it. So my very first expense was that market survey. That's the very first expense I had in the business to see who would really want to do this thing at that price point. And the feedback, was substantial, right? Over 33% of the people at the targeted price point said, yeah, we'll subscribe to that. Now, that is something concrete. That's just not me thinking that I believe in this thing, right? I was saying to someone, if you're going to fail in a startup, fail quickly, right? You just want to slug through it and then fail gradually. And so finding people and peers, I go to every startup events I could. And I know people are sometimes afraid of sharing their ideas. But I've always said that the idea thieves are generally very poor on execution. You really, the notion of having an idea and the notion of executing an idea, 2 different things, right? And frankly, if it's that easy to steal, they're going to steal it anyway, right? So I would share my idea with anyone who would listen and ask, what do you think? And the feedback was always, if you could do it, it would be great. And so that was, again, sharpening the vision, I think.
So you build relationships in the process of the idea.
Trustworthy relationship. People whose opinion I felt had weight.
You respected had weight.
Yes.
And then you also, you qualified the idea by doing the market research.
Absolutely.
So data and relationships.
Data and relationships. Otherwise, you're moving with with the wind. And frankly, when the tough times come, which they will, you will have very little as a basis to say, I should stick with this. You need something concrete outside of just your feeling to say, this is worth pursuing.
On that point, does anyone have a burning question? If not, I'll ask another one. I was really struck by it hit home for me, number 9, I believe, where you talked about, I wish I could have celebrated more of the little victories. Mm-hmm. I know as a visionary, I'm consumed with what's possible and the future and the synergy of everything. How do you tangibly practice that? Contentment.
Yeah. Well, you part of this is, again, about being a good leader. It's not about you celebrating just for yourself. It's about building your team, right? When I was saying, I think with Clarence earlier, when I did my business plan for our venture, the business plan called for us to raise like $4 or $5 million just to get a prototype going. And I went to a couple of meetups where one of the presenters, Bijoy Goswami, the founder of Bootstrap.org, said, hey, cash starvation is the soil in which true innovation flourish. And I realized, so I'm cash starved here. I need $4 or $5 million, not happening. What can I do? And with that idea, I was actually able to, my team and I were able to solve all the major technical problems that we had on my savings, or savings of $250,000, every single one. And so as we solved each technical problem, by the time we raised capital, we were raising capital to go into production, not to solve problems, but to go into production. And so again, as every time we solve a problem, we celebrate. And these are not trivial problems; these are fairly complex problems, right? And so that continuous recognition, hey, one down, next one down, next one, that kind of thing is crucial to your success.
Peter, you're a rich resource. We're glad you're in our circle.
Thank you.
Thank you.